The US is facing one major problem, and that is the US national debt. The US national debt has surged 30 trillion. Yeah, that's with a T. Joe Biden was getting his billions and trillions mixed up at the debate stage.
We have 1,000 trillionaires in America. I mean, billionaires in America.
Over $1,300,000,000,300,000,000.
But this is actually trillion. This is the debt, and it is climbing every single second. You can see it here, just the amount of money that has been spent every single second. And the 30 trillion, it's an unfathomable amount of money. And the problem is, it's basically like a boiling frog. If you put a frog in water and you slowly heat the water up, the frog will do nothing. It doesn't realize until it's too late and it's been boiled to death. This is exactly the same as the US economy and the situation we're in now, where the US economy is the frog and it's just slowly been boiled and boiled and boiled and boiled, and there's no reaction until it's too late and the frog's dead. And that would be the US economy or the US empire gone. And that is the problem that is faced at the moment. And to understand this crisis and how we got there, you have to go back in time. Over the past 2 decades, especially, there's been several key events that have skyrocketed the national debt to unprecedented levels. The first is sort of the early 2000s, where there was significant military spending on all the foreign wars. You had Afghanistan, Iraq, and all the other wars and military interventions and NATO expansion that has occurred, costing the US economy. I think what Afghanistan was like 8 trillion. All the other foreign wars adding up, and during this time as well, interest rates were falling. And this is an important point, and I'll build on this later. But the reason this is important because interest rates normally serve as a bridge to boost the economy. See, if you want to boost the economy, you can lower interest rates, which makes borrowing cheaper. It makes loans cheaper. It means it's not as rewarding to save or buy bonds because the interest rates are so low. And if the interest rates are lower, everyone saves, everyone has more money, can loan cheaper, can buy houses cheaper, which boosts the economy. And during that early decade, interest rates were falling, which meant people had more money to buy houses. And obviously, this eventually led to the housing crisis in 2008, which was a big problem. Now, the reason this was a problem was because interest rates were already pretty much at zero, so they couldn't lower them anymore. So the only way to stimulate the economy was to bail out the banks and start quantitative easing. And this is where the money printers went on a rampage. They printed money, and they essentially printed money out of thin air. Basically, they bought the Fed, which is a private institution, bought a bunch of assets, bonds, loans, assets, stocks, anything they could get their hands up, boosting everything up and pumping trillions into the economy at the expense of adding trillions onto the national deficit. Then your next big major event, and even post 2008, they didn't stop printing, they just carried it on. They sort of got addicted to printing money, and because they knew it was going into the stock market, which if they owned assets, owned real estate, they would benefit from them printing money, so there was incentive for them to do so. Then you get to 2020, COVID pandemic, and this is the next one where, they had to print trillions and trillions and pump it into the system as part of COVID relief to stop, a massive global depression because all the businesses were obviously couldn't work. There was no money coming in, and it was a major problem. So they pumped trillions into the stock market. They did, the COVID packages and all that, all the stuff they put into the economy. You had, relief packages, paying for people to stay at home, furlough schemes, and that all flooded the market with more money. Then Joe Biden came into office and he just carried on this spending. He added another, I think, 8 trillion, probably 10 trillion now. And from what I understand, I mean, I don't even know what he's spending on. I mean, I really don't know how he's managed to spend that much, but he has, despite, the pandemic being over, he's still managed to spend trillions. Is the world a better place from it? I don't think so. But this is why it's caused a problem, because it was unnecessary spending and it's caused a lot of inflation. See, between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, they've added about 16 to 20 trillion into the economy. Now that's flooded the market with money, and you have the same amount of goods and services, but more money, which obviously only means one way, and that means inflation. Now, this is where the real problem with the 30 trillion national debt comes in, because post 2008, we were in the zero interest rate economy. So, and the government is on a floating rate, so they pay they had 30 trillion in debt, but the interest rates were zero, so they're paying basically zero on the national debt. Money was free, no problem. But now there's a big problem because of the inflation, because of all of the excess money, and they've pumped too much money into the system, chasing too few goods. You have the inflation, which is skyrocketing, and now, as a result, to cool inflation, they've had to increase the interest rates to 5%. Now, this is the problem with the debt, because before, the debt burden was essentially zero. It was a few hundred billion, which is, to a government, peanuts. It's nothing. But now those debt burdens have skyrocketed, because now they have to pay 5% on the 30 trillion every single year. And this is the huge issue, because now the government really doesn't have money for anything. It doesn't have the money to pay off the loans. It doesn't have the money for the schools. It doesn't have the money for the social security, the healthcare, and there really is no solution to this. They are the boiling frog in the water. They're going to have to print money to pay off their own debt. Now, because the alternative is to cut everything, to cut healthcare, to cut education, social security, military, all these things. But they're like, no politician is going to do that, because politicians are addicted to spending, and they just kick the can down the line for the next issue. They spend for 4 years, then they let the next person in who spends for 4 years. And now you're in a problem where the debt service is going to be more than the military spending. The amount of debt interest payment they're going to have at 5% is like a third of the entire budget. It used to be 0%. Now it's a third of the entire budget. You can see on the graph here just the skyrocketing costs of the debt. And this is the biggest issue that no one talks about. And the reason it's important, because the debt payment is the most important payment out of everything, because countries like people buy US bonds, countries like Russia, China, India, all these countries buy trillions and trillions of US bonds. And if they were to suddenly stop, then that would be the end of the US empire. Ray Dalio talks about this a lot. He talks about de-dollarization. He talks about empires, the rise and fall of empires, how they start, how reserve currencies start, and the way it works is there's normally a war, a country comes out on top. That was clearly post-World War II. America's the king. They had the best economy, the most gold, the best technology. They threw the nukes on Japan, proved they had the best military. And then everyone starts, because of that, the US is doing the most trades, the best economy, which means people are naturally using the dollar. And then because everyone's using the dollar, it becomes the world reserve currency, because everyone's using it for transactions. It's stable. Everyone uses it to buy dollars in, and it becomes the standard for the world. But then, and this strengthens it, because everyone's demanding dollars. Everyone wants dollars. And this means that the US can just borrow money, because people demand the dollars anyway. And eventually, this leads to financial weakness, because they're borrowing them all that money from their future self, and they have to pay it back. And over the past 20 years, it's been borrowing 30 trillion, and now we're in a situation where the interest rates mean we have to pay it all back. And now we have so much to pay for. They're paying for the Ukraine war, they're paying for wars in the Middle East, they might have to face a war with China and Taiwan. They've got military bases they have to maintain everywhere in the world. All this adds up and up and up, and this is why there's a massive economic crisis, because the dollar is now really, really weak because of all the printing of the money. They now don't have the money to service the debt and pay off the debt. And when you look at Ray Dalio's books, when you watch his videos, these are all the signs of a late stage empire that's in its decline. And his signs of a late stage declining empire are lots of debt, which it has, internal politics and conflict, which there is, diminishing power compared to the external, which there is. You only have to look at the US compared to China. 30 years ago, China was nothing, no comparison. Now, China is running the world, and over an extension, and then eventually that leads to external wars because people see America as weak. And you can't say that's exactly the case now. Russia thinks America's weak because of everything that's going on. So they thought, America's weak. They're not going to do anything. We'll invade Ukraine. The terrorists in the Middle East think we can invade Israel. Or you see all those internal conflicts because the US is not as strong as it used to be because it has all the debt. It's in that trouble. People have lost faith in the currency, and this is the biggest problem of the decade that no one is addressing, and is going to, if not addressed now, going to lead to the end of the US dollar and the US empire, and that is something I'm confident of. Let me know if you think that the national debt is the biggest problem the US faces, and whether you think this is going to lead to the end of the American empire as we know it.